big story of the week. Judge Brett Kavanaugh is now Justice Brett Kavanaugh, the new Supreme Court justice, taking part in a ceremonial swearing in at the White House Monday night. The president apologized for the pain and suffering Kavanaugh and his family endured during the confirmation process. Well, we've asked Professor Josh Wilson, who's a political science professor with the Center on American Politics at the University of Denver, to join us today. We often turn to you in matters related to the Supreme Court, so thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me back.
This was unprecedented. The controversy, the vote, there was so much to this confirmation process that we'd never seen before here.
Yeah, it harkens back to a few things, like people have been pointing at Bork's confirmation process, or failed confirmation process, and then also Justice Thomas's. But this really was apart from that in many ways, especially in Judge Kavanaugh's defense of himself in front of the hearing.
So let's talk about going forward. Right now, I mean, he seems to have settled in very nicely. There were no waves with his joining the bench. Do you think that's true behind the scenes as well? Well,
so the court is an interesting place to work in that you're joining a group of colleagues. You know, we're limited to 9 justices who have lifetime appointments, and so there are a lot of incentives for them to get along with each other, right? They have to see each other constantly. Sure. They work together closely, so there's a high premium put on basically civility and getting along.
Okay, so but his appointment changes everything about the U.S. Supreme Court. But I think one of the first that you and I briefly talked about was just how how people view the High Court now, given that there was so much controversy leading up to this.
Yeah, so this is a kind of a fine point in terms of the separation of powers, that really the judiciary's power relies on people believing in the authority of the court, and that's both the public and also the other branches of government. And when people start to see the court as being overtly political, as opposed to being kind of neutral, legal decision makers, it starts to weaken that legitimacy. People start seeing it as political and not as legal and neutral, and it just weakens the power of the court overall. And that's really one of the most detrimental things that has come out of this.
So public opinion is one thing, but once they start issuing decisions, this truly shifts the power of the Supreme Court, correct?
Yeah, it definitely does, right? We now have a solid conservative majority, and it's not just a conservative majority, but it is a more conservative majority than we've seen in the past.
So explain the rule of 4.
So the rule of 4 is that in order for the Supreme Court to hear a case, 4 justices have to agree in committee that it should be heard. Now we have 5 conservative justices, 4 of whom are very conservative, and so we might be able to expect that in the future conservative groups are going to try to push more cases through the lower courts to get them to come to the higher court, because they know they have a more receptive audience and maybe more justices who want to hear more cases that might help conservative causes.
And those are issues that I think a lot of people raised are Roe versus Wade, DACA cases, LGBTQ issues.
Exactly. One thing we can really, I think, expect to see are more cases around religious liberties versus LGBTQ rights is one of those things. As you said, abortion rights is going to be something that everybody's expecting to start coming up, because there's always kind of pressure in the lower courts, a constant stream of lower court cases that can be appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court coming out of that.
So where do you see the U.S. Supreme Court headed from here? Well, yeah.
Yeah, well.
That's a loaded question.
It's a big question too. The other thing, I guess, to recognize about the court is things happen slowly, right? That for the Supreme Court to hear a case, it has to work its way through 2 layers of lower courts. And because of that, and court cases take so long, that really the pipeline of kind of feeder cases, it might take a while for a lot of them to work their way up. And so this is going to be a long-term kind of strategy, a long-term event.
And with 30 seconds left, do you think the midterms will have any impact on everything that we're seeing in Washington?
Yeah, so no, that's a big question. So really quickly, we can already look at kind of public opinion polling and voter excitement in both parties and how the Kavanaugh hearings related to that. The other is, if Republicans lose power, they hold power for the foreseeable future in the judiciary, and that's really important to recognize.
Josh Wilson, University of Denver, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you.
Back in a moment.